Planning to promote too many books tonight, but I would recommend that you read Professor Guinier's memoir called Lift Every Voice, which deals with this situation in 1993 and its aftermath, both in the policy issues and personal issues. But before I open this up, there are a couple other matters that both of you have reflected on and you've written about the issues of race and class. And I'm wondering, in your views over the next few years, where's affirmative action in all this? You both seem to write about affirmative action as though it's either withering on the vine or is dead. And I wonder what you see happening over the next few years as far as that particular concept goes.
I don't think there's any question that the political support for affirmative action has diminished greatly. You look at not only recent cases, I can think of the Michigan case and others, but I think of the statement that came from Justice O'Connor, who said now several years ago that she thought at best affirmative action had a 25-year lifespan. And I think that it's probably less than that if you look at the poll numbers in terms of American public opinion on this issue. There simply isn't the will on the part of the American people. I think the case is there to be made to justify the use of affirmative action. I think it's still an essential public policy tool when it comes to race in this country. I think it's absolutely critical that someone say out loud the doors have to be open, and that a lot of the old boys clubs that had previously been shut not only on the basis of sex, but on the basis of skin color, ethnicity, and more. But that really is not in the best interest of America. I think that the models that are held up, specific U.S. military and the like, demonstrate why it is so essential that America be an open society where people who work hard, who demonstrate ability and ambition, be given the opportunity to succeed. So I would hope that case would be made, but I do so fully aware that I don't think that much of the American public is with me on this point. And it's for that reason, just if you allow me, Mr. Smoke, to respond to Professor Guinier, that I don't think that it's speaking from any point of authoritarianism to say to people, you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your family, your children, your neighbors. You have to think about what is best for your community, that your actions do have consequences, and that if you are waiting for someone else to save you, you're going to be waiting a long time. Certainly, race and racism, I would argue at least at a minimum, racial consciousness is a part of the America that I live in every day. But I don't think that we can stand here and say, wait until the end of racism before you get your act together. That you can simply say because racism is an issue in American society, you have no responsibility for trying to lift yourself up and put yourself in a position to succeed. The fact is, most African Americans do not live in poverty. The fact is, there has been a tremendous, tremendous historical surge in the number of African Americans who are graduating from high school, who are graduating from college, who have a middle-class status in American society, who have more political power than ever before. These are all achievements to be celebrated in the black community. And they offer an example of the power of uplift, even at times when we had more outrageous racism to face than we do today. And therefore to say to people, make wise choices, it seems to me is to speak with compassion, is to speak with caring to people that you are truly concerned about. It is not to speak with any authoritarian voice as if you're scolding a child. It is to say to people, here are steps that you can take to help yourself. And I say this out of love to you because I can see that there is too much dysfunctional behavior taking place. I see too much acceptance of petty crime. As Bill Cosby famously said in his speech on the 50th anniversary of Brown, he imagined that a mother in the courtroom weeping and wailing as she sees her son, a teenager, being taken away. She says, "Oh, my boy, my little boy." Bill Cosby says, "What are you talking about? Where were you when he was 10 years old and stealing pound cake and Cokes out of the corner store? Where were you when he was 16 and got his first gun?" This kid is not anybody's political prisoner. He's a petty criminal. And what kind of parent are you, and where is his father? Where is a father to offer some model of what it means to be a real black man in this picture? Is that an authoritarian voice? I don't think so.
The first thing is, I'm not advocating that we wait until the end of racism. I'm not advocating that we wait. I'm saying we do something, but I hope theme is we do something collectively. It is we that have a responsibility. And I want to respond first to Juan's last point, and then I really do want to talk about affirmative action. So it's certainly true that, and they're connected, it's certainly true that there's an increase in the black middle class. But it is also true that black families have about 15% of the wealth of white families. And that the typical white family has a net worth that is 10 times that of its black and Latino counterparts. And here I want to make an important distinction. When we talk about middle class, we usually talk about people based on their income. But in the context of power and resources in this country, it is not simply your income, it is your access to assets. Do you own your home? Do you have friends and relatives from whom you can borrow money? Do you have money in the bank? Do your parents have the money to pay for you to go to college? And it turns out that most wealth in this country is in the form of gifts. So that economists estimate that between 50 to 80% of lifetime wealth results from gifts in one form or another, ranging from the down payment on a house, to a free college education, to a bequest from the death of a parent. Now, it is the wealth gap that really affects the black community, and that I don't hear anyone talking about when they say graduate from high school, or wait till you're in your 20s to get married. Because it's really about the fact, because of the legacy of slavery, because of the legacy of Jim Crow, that there are some people in this country who have had access to wealth for generations and have been able to pass that on down to their children. So even when you talk about families with the same income, white families have more wealth. They have assets. So among lower income families, the median black family has zero net worth, while a white family at the same income has a net worth of $10,000. Among the middle class, the white family that earns $40,000 a year has a net worth of about $80,000. Their black counterparts have an average net worth of less than 1/2 of that amount. So part of what I'm saying is don't wait for the end of anything, but we have to mobilize against the right, or toward the right set of objectives, and build alliances with people who, in fact, are often similarly situated to us and don't realize it. So let me now use that to move to the issue of affirmative action. Now, I've always been a supporter of affirmative action. But I also have a metaphor that I've developed in conjunction with my co-author, Gerald Torres. We have a book called The Miner's Canary, and the miner's canary is the metaphor that I want to use to talk about affirmative action. So the miners used to take a canary into the mines to alert them when the atmosphere in the mines was too toxic for the miners. And the canary had a little fragile respiratory system. And when the canary was gasping for breath, that was a sign to the miners that there was something wrong and they needed to evacuate the mines. And the argument that I want to put forward, and that Gerald Torres and I have developed, is that the experience of those who've been underrepresented, the experience of those who've been excluded, the experience of those who've been marginalized, and because this is a panel or a debate on black responsibility, I'll talk about black people, but you can make a similar argument in other contexts for women, or for the disabled, or for gays and lesbians, depending on the situation. But in this context, black people are the canary in the mines. We are vulnerable and also highly visible. And often, problems that converge around the canary are highlighted because of that combination of visibility and vulnerability. But the problem is not with the canary. And affirmative action, in my view, misdiagnoses the problem because it says we have a meritocratic system, there's something wrong with the canary, it can't seem to meet our meritocratic objectives, so we therefore have to fix the canary. Or in the case of Bill Cosby and some of his speeches, we have to pathologize the canary. I am here to say we need to heed the experience of the canary to begin to rethink the atmosphere in the minds and fix the minds. Not just to benefit the canary, but to benefit the minors as well. So how does affirmative action work in this context? And I got an offer to talk about merit. Basically, affirmative action suggests there's nothing wrong with the meritocracy. It's just that there are some people who can't seem to get it together to do well on these tests or to get the GPA or to do the other things that we count as merit. My argument is that there's no such thing as abstract merit. And I take this from Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winning economist. Merit, he says, is an incentive system that rewards actions a society values. Merit is an incentive system that rewards actions a society values. Now, you say, oh, well, we value high test scores. Well, why do we value high test scores? What is it that those tests are really telling us? Do they tell us who is going to become a leader? Not a phony leader, not a self-serving leader, but a publicly spirited leader? No. Do they tell us who is going to graduate from college and do well in their life? No. Do they tell us what your first year college grades are going to be? The SAT, for example, or the ACT? No. SAT scores, LSAT scores, GRE scores, ACT scores, they tell us more about your grandparents' wealth than they tell us about anything else. Now, that's part of why I was talking about wealth. So we have a system that we call merit. We might as well ask people to submit their income tax returns when they are applying to college, and then call that merit, and admit people based on what the bottom line suggests. But we have been consumed in a testocracy, in which we think that because we can measure it, somehow we should therefore value it. Now, it is true that within each race and ethnic group, as your parents' income goes up, so do your test scores. Now, what does this mean? It means that's true of white people, not just black people. It means that if you look at colleges, especially selective colleges, you can't just look in terms of race, you have to also look in terms of class. And if you look to see who are the white people at the most selective colleges, they are also the rich white people. So who's missing from these schools? It's not just about racial diversity. You do not have economic diversity at selected institutions, no matter what they say about their financial aid or their recruitment of poor people. So Tony Carnevale did a study of the 146 most selected colleges and universities in this country. 74% of the students at those schools came from the top 25% of the social and economic status indicators in this country. 74% of the students came from the top 25%. 3% of the students came from the bottom 25%. 3%. 10% came from the bottom half. That means 3 plus 7. And of course, we're using merit to make this determination. Okay, now how does that tie into affirmative action? Well, I see affirmative action as a band-aid for the canary. It is inadequate It does not go far enough in terms of addressing the source of the problem. I'm taking my leadership here from Juan. We are not just victims saying we want a little piece of the action. We are leaders of a cause, and the cause is justice, and the cause is fairness, and the cause is access to higher education in a democracy, because this is essential, not only for the legitimacy of our democracy, but for its very functionality. If we do not have an educated population, we are going to continue to elect some of the numbskulls we have in office.
About this item, but Mr. Williams, in the book, among the dead-end movement, you talk about cloning leaders and dead-end movements. You take off on reparations. You just beat up on folks about reparations. And so I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about that, and because there's still some discussion about that whole movement, and Congressman Conyers is now in majority, and so his bill will go in again. And, but you think that the concept in some ways is harmful to our community? At least that's what I got from the book.
Well, at the time, and in responding to Professor Guinier, when she talks about the disproportionate wealth in the white community, when she talks about the idea of merit being distorted, again, I think maybe she is for income redistribution in the United States, but it would seem to me to suggest that if African Americans have less wealth, even as they may be moving towards the middle class in terms of income, but if they have less wealth, then people have to work to generate wealth, to create wealth, and there should be a focus on economic development in the black community as a point of strength. But that's not the way it's portrayed. Instead, I think Professor Guinier prefers to deal in the fanciful, the theoretical, the abstract, as opposed to saying to people, here is a very difficult environment, one in which class is playing a larger role in American society today, and one in which it's far easier to get left behind, and maybe even more, sadly, if you are a minority, and certainly an African American, getting left behind is all too easy to do in this generation of increased class divide in American society. So if you truly care about people, if you're trying to help them bridge that class gap, you wouldn't be saying to them, don't wait until there is radical income redistribution in American society. You would be telling them specific steps that they could take to help themselves, to achieve uplift for themselves and for their families. Now when it comes to reparations, Mr. Schmoke, reparations is a total hoax. A total hoax in which we see, for the most part, you have people who are total shysters going around the country telling people they can get money off of their tax returns, they can get all sorts of special deals. If you only write me a check for $50 or $100 so I can stake your claim for reparations. There are people out there who say, oh, reparations will cure all the problems of black America. They never ever detail what it is they are talking about. To the contrary, they try to make the case that reparations are be-all and end-all, a curative. I think that what it is another hustle, another con against a very vulnerable population. It's not only the case that 90% plus of white Americans don't want anything to do with reparations. It's also the case that 50% plus of African Americans want nothing to do with reparations. And yet no one ever stands up and says this. You mentioned Congressman Conyers of Michigan, Mr. Schmoke. The congressman has been trying to get simply a study done on reparations in the U.S. Congress since the late 1980s. I repeat, the late 1980s. It's now almost 20 years. It has gone nowhere. Talk about studies of reparations, even on city council levels, where you have city councils who say, well, what about companies that once did business with slave owners, or newspapers that advertised for slave owners, or institutions that took money from people who profited from the slave trade. They have all sorts of schemes and plans to try to do that, but they never themselves say, we will pay reparations to those who've been left behind.